Hello, everyone, and welcome to the movie Changeup Star Wars The Bad Batch review. We're doing the episode 6 review. I'm Joe Fricke. I'm joined with my co host, as always, Tristan Mayer. We've been reviewing every episode of The Bad Batch. Usually we do it on Friday nights, but Tristan had some stuff going on, so he couldn't do it then. Um, Tristan, what were your kind of general overall thoughts on the episode? I believe it
I
was
liked
called
it a lot.
Decommissioned.
You mentioned I had stuff going on. One of the things I ended up doing late last night was watching The Last Jedi, so I was in a very Star Wars mood coming into the podcast today. So I had a good time with the episode. It was probably the closest we've gotten to a filler episode so far this season, where it was just like, oh, here's the adventure and completed. But once again, they had that little tiny tease at the end, just little tiny things here and there to make you still feel like you're not totally wasting your time. But yeah, I'm getting to the point now where I'm like, okay, this is fun, but let's bring Crosshair back. I had a good time, but I'm ready for what's next.
Yeah, I thought they were kind of do the thing of like every other episode bounce between like Crosshair and a new villain, but we haven't seen Crosshair for a few episodes now, so it's definitely time to bring him back, I think.
Yeah, and we got yet another crossover character this episode too. Two of them, in fact,
Yeah.
if not three, considering who you think is in the end of the episode. But we'll get to that towards the end of the podcast when we get to our theories.
Yeah, I know a lot of people hated the characters, like the two sisters whose names I'm blanking on right now, but people didn't like.
Trace and Rafa, I think it is.
Yeah, Trace and Rafa. People didn't like them so much in their appearance in the final season of the Clone Wars, but I didn't mind them, and I actually quite enjoyed them in this episode. Kind of, what were your thoughts on the sisters coming back?
Yeah, I liked him. I didn't mind him in the Clone Wars. I think maybe people were upset because they wanted to be focused on the old characters in this final season, and introducing new characters like this. I think was like people were like, okay, that's not what we came here for. It's not new characters. This
Yeah.
is the final season. But yeah, I don't mind them. I think they're pretty good here. I mentioned last week that I'm a little bit tired of these crossover episodes at this point. Like I enjoy them, I have fun with them, but I do think like I want them to introduce new characters or at least bring in characters we haven't necessarily like seen in this form before. Like I think Clone Wars it was fun because they could bring in, oh, here's the Jedi from that one scene, and make him
Yeah.
cool. But I don't know. I like it, but I'm ready for them to move on and get some new characters, at least for a couple episodes until we get to maybe the finale.
Yeah. Hey, you can't forget about Sid. Sid's my favorite. Of
That's true.
of like kind of their new Rebels characters besides the Bad Batch. Rio Perlman. Watched a lot of Cheers. Matilda. So
I didn't. I'm curious how you felt like they have this kind of base with Sid now. Do you think they're gonna be here like permanently, at least for the season? It's like their home planet now with Sid, or is this just like a couple episode thing?
yeah, I think Sid's gonna be around for at least this season. They're gonna be pulling random jobs for her, doing random missions.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of what the vibe I'm getting, anyways.
Yeah, it's just setup I got for them. But anyway, Sid gives them a mission because they did so well on their last one for Jabba the Hutt that now she has another one for him where they get to essentially recover this tactical droid from a old droid factory on your
Corellia.
favorite planet, Corellia.
Not gonna lie, there a small part of me was like, are we? Because we were just talking, I think, on our last review or the review before about characters we'd like to see come to animation, and we were talking like Han is the only character we haven't really seen come to animation from like the
Mm-hmm.
main Star Wars characters from the original trilogy, and like a part of me was like, are we gonna get like a, you know, 15-year-old Han Solo in this episode?
I was looking for it. Like, I wouldn't say I was excited for it, but it would have gotten me a pop a little bit, especially if they were like, "Oh, surprise! Alden Ehrenreich is doing the voice, and you didn't know." That
Yeah,
would be what really got me. But yeah, it would have been fun. In hindsight, I'm glad they didn't do that because we already had two characters that cross over. It would be kind of
yeah,
ridiculous if they're like, "Oh, also Han Solo is in this
yeah.
episode."
Yeah, I think there's like maybe like 50,000 people that live in the Star Wars galaxy at most.
Yep, and they're all played by about 15 actors.
Yeah,
You can never recast them. Let's do CG versions of the same person who already played the character before.
exactly.
Thankfully, it's animated, so you don't have to worry about that. But yeah, their mission here is to go recover this tactical droid from the droid factory here on Corellia, and lo and behold, on their should be easy mission, they run into the problem of Trace and Rappa, characters we've seen in the Clone Wars very recently to this, showing up, and they want the same thing. So they have this kind of battle of two bounty hunters, or two teams of bounty hunters, I guess you'd say, coming for the same goal. What'd you think of that setup, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was fine. I still, like you said, would have liked to see new characters, but I kind of like the idea of like, okay, we got to get this tactical droid to figure out how to beat clones, but also like they could have just like shot them. Like I just don't. I just like plot wise, I don't understand why you need like the information from a tactical droid to figure out how to beat clones when it's like, okay, they're just like elite soldiers.
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't understanding the Jedi and their tactics be more important? Like, that's like the clones rarely, at least from what we saw in the Clone Wars, weren't really leading their own mission. So wouldn't like all of their knowledge and information and like how they ran missions were based on how the Jedi did stuff. Well, the Empire is gonna control and tell the clones to do different tactics and different theories and different ideas. So I don't really know what learning I just don't understand how a Clone Wars tactical droid is really going to help you beat the clones.
Yeah, I'm curious if there was kind of going to be similar to last episode where she set them up to this easy thing like, oh, it's just a baby for this one client, and it turns out it's a monster for Jabba the Hutt. Like
Yeah.
maybe she says, oh yeah, it was a droid for just so they can study how to be clones, but in reality it was for a different purpose. Maybe the
Yeah.
Empire is trying to get it. Maybe somebody's trying to study how to beat Jedi, how to fight against Stormtrooper or something like that. You never know. It could be the rebellion wants it so that they can study how to fight against clones, and they wouldn't necessarily have that information. That would be interesting. But I mean, that's probably not ever going to be explained. But
No,
it would be
the
fun as a headcanon to be like, oh, maybe she had this ulterior motive that it was what she said it was wasn't necessarily what it actually is. That I feel like that's
yeah.
kind of the character she is, where she has one motive that she's saying outward, then the other motive what she's actually doing with it afterward.
Yeah, I think a lot of times with fan theories, a lot of it is like this weird convoluted thing to explain something away when really the simplest answer is the right answer. I think we're just supposed to kind of take it as face value and recognize that on a certain level this is a show for like young teens. So
Mm-hmm.
when you're trying to dissect it with your like 27, 28-year-old brain, it's like, of course, you're going to come up with flaws.
Yeah, and that's just part of the, especially for these kind of episodes that are just like, oh, go there, get the thing type episodes. They
Yeah.
might not be checking the details so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, like I've seen theories like Dora the Explorer is a show about a girl with like schizophrenia talking to her delusions, and it's like no, or here's an idea: it's a show about teaching kids Spanish. That's something.
Yeah, you never know. The Occam's razor, it's a Lucas razor, you know.
Yeah,
Uh, I like the kind of setup here of them going to a droid factory. I like that they're bringing in the battle droids once in a while to still make us feel like we're not quite out of the prequel era yet. Where Rebels it definitely felt like, okay, this is the
yeah,
beginning of the original trilogy era. This is like this is the turn of the Empire. The Empire's already here and already powerful, and this still feels like, oh, we're leaving that era behind, so we're not quite out of the Clone Wars yet, and there's this transition period. So I'm liking
yeah.
that they're bringing in these old characters and these old
Yeah.
droids.
Yeah, it's curious, like if there's a line or like Lucasfilm, draws like okay, anything before this time period is still like kind of the Clone Wars era, and anything after this time period is like the original trilogy era and all that. Because to me, it's like you're watching Bad Batch, and maybe it's because it's animated, but it still very much feels like a Clone Wars era, time period. But then you look at Solo, which takes place like I'm trying to like 10 years later, and that very much feels like original trilogy. So I almost wonder if like the Kenobi show, which I think is like 5 years after, like 5 to 10 years after Revenge of the Sith, if that's gonna kind of be that line of like if there's gonna be a little bit of prequel trilogy elements, but it's gonna be a lot more of that original trilogy elements.
Yeah, I'm very excited that they're exploring this era of Star Wars a bit more because we've seen a lot of stuff, especially in the recent like Disney era of like original trilogy characters and the original trilogy settings. Like,
Yeah,
I swear there's 100 stories that take place between New Hope and Empire Strikes Back just because of the comic books and the other novels. It's like I like that they're getting onto these other eras so they can explore a bit more of different things. It doesn't feel quite as condensed as because Star Wars I feel like needs to be wider than just like a few years here and there.
Yeah, yeah, it's just yeah, and especially as we go to the High Republic and all of these various eras and various like time periods, I think it'll be cool to see different settings within Star Wars.
So the action here gets really up the ante here because the two groups kind of collide and they have this competition of who gets to have it and who doesn't. But it gets interrupted because they alert the police droids, and then there's a huge battle sequence of all these police droids kind of invading the droid factory, and the Bad Batch and the two siblings, I believe they are, have to team up and fight against these police droids in kind of an action sequence here. What do you think of this before we get to the finale of it?
That was the moment I kind of figured out what the plot of the episode was going to be. Is they were going to have to destroy all of these police droids because I was like, okay, they don't want the Bad Batch killing people. So as soon as they were like, oh, it's police droids, I'm like, well, they're all Bad Batch is definitely going to have to kill all of them.
Yeah, they're taking the George Lucas approach. They're like, okay, remove the moral quandary
Yeah,
a little bit at least.
yeah. Let's make this less complicated. They're not living creatures, so we can kill them, and you can still root for the good guy.
Yeah, that was pretty fun, and I like the dynamics of this scene where the two groups are also competing for the head while still fighting against these police droids, and like they're changing hands and stuff like that. It almost reminds me of like I don't know, the end of Infinity or the end of Endgame where they're all kind of passing the gauntlet
Yeah, oh
around.
yeah, it
You know?
reminded me of that too. There was a moment of I can't remember. I want to say it was maybe Omega that picked it up and started running with it. That it reminded me very much of Hawkeye picking it up in like that underground tunnel and started
Mm-hmm.
running with it. Where it almost I wonder if you could go back and compare if it's like an identical shot. And that's reminds me of one of the things of like I saw Dave Filoni say in an interview one time. I think he was talking about the Mandalorian, where he doesn't watch Star Wars when writing Star Wars. He watches like things that inspire him. So I wonder if that was like intentional, of like, because it's like Marvel is more of like the modern day myth, so it would make sense to like occasionally pull from that.
Yeah, I like that. I love Dave Filoni's philosophy of not just tributing Star Wars, but like
Yeah,
tributing the whole the
yeah,
whole film. Like that's kind of what Star Wars is, a big
oh,
tribute to film. But
yeah,
yeah, I wonder if that is intentional. It'd be interesting to go back and check, like you said, because of course they're all under the same branch now.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you don't have to pay nobody for anything.
Yeah. We get a confirmation, I would say, now of Wrecker's plot line here. We've had all
Oh
these
yeah, that
seasons of him
was
hitting his head, and I think it was like episode one he hit his head for the first time. We were like, "Ooh, is Wrecker going to be activated?" And it looks
yeah,
like now he is. At least that's what they're leading us towards. He hits his head here in this action scene and kind of immediately starts saying like almost giving out the full line.
yeah.
G-
Good
Good soldiers
soldiers.
follow, and then doesn't quite finish it. But looks like we're going for an Order 66 turn for Wrecker here.
Yeah, they've been hinting at this for a while, and I wonder when it's going to come to fruition. If they're going to run into an old Jedi, and that's going to trigger it. Maybe they're working for Jabba. Maybe they go to Tatooine and run into Obi-Wan, and
Hmm.
maybe we see the Bad Batch versus Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan's got to fight for his life. It's kind of, and it
Don't
depends if,
tease me like that, Joe. That sounds pretty awesome.
and especially if we get in a season finale situation, like, okay, we know Obi-Wan lives, but like any of the Bad Batch can die, and what if Obi-Wan has to kill one of the Bad Batch for, in order to survive and complete his mission of protecting Luke. So
I'll be very into that. And I we'll get towards the end, but I do wonder who they set up towards to be this person that they're answering to, because I don't want to go to the theories yet. But if that's a Jedi that sees in the final shot here, that could be what Wrecker ends up attacking.
yeah, it's not my theory as of yet, but of it being a Jedi, but I think it's one of two people.
And we get yet some more, a little bit of Omega being force sensitive moments here, where she's kind of in touch with her feelings and intuition more so than just her
Yeah,
brash attacking.
yeah. Yeah, we've gotten more from Omega, and I kind of like what they're doing with her. I thought she was going to be kind of like Mary Sue with the bow, but they've made her like she kind of sucks at it right now, but she shows promise. So
Yeah, that's something that happens a lot in these cartoon shows, especially, is they just like any character, not necessarily like Mary Sue type thing, but all these characters will pick up a skill like immediately and be perfect at it.
Yeah.
But between this and I think even in Rebels, they had like this transition of the characters having to learn and get better as at least over the course of the first season. But yeah, I liked Omega's kind of, and we got the scene towards the beginning too where Echo is kind of helping her and training her.
Yeah.
So we get kind of that connection where
Yeah.
I think we're gonna have each of the clones have like a couple of moments to connect with Omega throughout the season. Where like it was a big Hunter episode the other week, so now we have a couple of Echo scenes this week.
Yeah, that was one of my biggest complaints last week. Is it felt like she had a good relationship with Hunter, a good relationship with Wrecker, and like I couldn't even remember her ever exchanging words with Echo or Tech. And so when they had that little exchange and he was teaching her how to use the bow, I was kind of happy about that. Hopefully, she gets something with Tech in like next episode or the episode after.
And that would be cool. I think that's a good format to not make it feel too crowded and give each of these clones moments to shine without really making it too obvious. That's what you're doing, you know.
Yeah.
And I really like the way they solve this problem here, where they're all kind of overwhelmed by the droids, so they turn on and kind of mod the battle droids and turn them against the other droids. It's almost like this Order 66 level thing where they're just like, oh, that's what the orders are, and they turn up and fight against their own team here at this point.
Yeah, that was kind of cool. I like that. They were kind of overwhelmed, so they just flipped the switch and.
Yeah, it was cool, and it wasn't something that came out of nowhere. That was like perfectly built up in the plot and set up and where they were at. I liked it a lot. It was a fun way to solve the problem.
Yeah.
That's a lot from all we got from that battle sequence here. That's pretty much the center of the episode. Do you have any final thoughts on just like the whole battle plan of the episode here?
Not really. I mean, like I said before, I still have like problems with the plot of the episode as a whole, but I think as far as what they presented, it was fun, it was entertaining, it wasn't like a mind-blowing episode. But I think as far as most of these Star Wars shows, people only remember, you know, the greatness, like the great moments of the great episodes, and so people always compare it to that. But I still feel like it's on par with, you know, the Rebels and Clone Wars so far.
Yeah, this feels to me like a episode where, like, if I was doing an Essentials of Bad Batch in a few years and I just wanted to hit the highlights, I might not do this episode. But if I was like, oh, I want to watch through like a lot of the good ones, I might throw this one on. It seems like, depending on where they go with this setup thing at the end, which we'll get to, but yeah, it seems to me like kind of a good solid episode that I might not end up thinking about or revisiting very much.
Yeah, and the more they harp on this whole good soldiers follow order things, the more I would just move that. Like, because before I mentioned, like, I would put that quote in my, like, Mount Rushmore of Star Wars animated quotes, but almost the more they harp on it and the more they use it, I'd put it just up on the main Mount Rushmore, you know. I wouldn't at this point in time, but if they keep, like, every time it's said so far, it's just, like, evokes emotion, whether it was, Crosshair saying it like a couple episodes ago, Wrecker saying it in this episode, or like starting to say it in this episode. It's just like,
you know what I think ultimately will earn its spot on that Mount Rushmore is if it gets mentioned in Obi-Wan or Ahsoka. Like if it's mentioned in one of those two shows or somehow in live action, I think that's like you've officially canonized this as a Star Wars quote that is said. I think Obi-Wan's a good spot for it. I would. If we get a clone somewhere,
if we get Commander Cody versus Obi-Wan, and Cody sees Obi-Wan and he says good soldiers follow orders before pulling a gun on Obi-Wan, come on. And you're telling me that doesn't belong in the Mount Rushmore of Star Wars quotes? Then you don't understand Star Wars.
No, God, we're getting so much Star Wars, but it's so easy to get excited about it when it's just consistently good. Even the weaker stuff is like good. Like this is not the best episode, but I had a good time watching it.
Yeah, if like this is the worst episode of the Bad Batch that we get, then this, you know, I can't complain.
So we got two final scenes here that I left to the end because I think they both lead into predictions and theories. The last one is sort of the goodbye scene where Trace and Rafa say goodbye to Echo. The team throughout this action have kind of bonded, as the storytelling would say. and then I think Omega is the one that offers like, oh, do you guys want to join our team maybe? And they say no. So do you think we ever see Trace and Rafa become members of the Bad Batch or team up with them again at some point in the future?
Before I answer this question, I just want to go back to earlier in the episode. If I love the exchange where I can't remember which one it was, but it was the older sister saying like, oh, is that an Echo? And Echo just pops in and he's like, wait, what? what did you want? And he was like, my name's Echo, and she was like, oh.
That was so good. I forgot about that.
I thought that was great.
That was one of the funnier lines that we've had so far.
But one of the things I remember Sid saying in the previous episode is you need money and or like you need money or you need a job or something and you need friends, and I think they're ultimately building, their friend group for whatever like the final battle of the season is going to be. So whether it's like the Camino uprising against the Empire or whatever the final battle of this season is, I think that's kind of what they're building. Is like I think that's when we could see Fennec Shand come back. We could see Trace and Rafa come back. We could see, these various characters. Maybe Cut LaQuaine comes back. We see these various characters that they meet along the way come back to help them out on whatever their final thing is in the final, in the final episode of the season. Or maybe Trace and Rafa come back to help them in the final battle of season 2 or something like that. But
yeah, I definitely don't think you've seen the last of them. I think, especially with the setup in the final scene, but I do think I like that they became friends with them by the end. It wasn't like Phoenix Shan, where they're still kind of enemies. I mean, I guess that makes sense for Phoenix Shan's character, but I think it's also cool for them to have actual friends that people they get along with. So it'd be fun for someone they can just call up in a moment of need and have them show up and save them.
yeah, for sure. One of the things I wanted to talk about was their droid R7. Is that Ahsoka's R7, or do you think this is just a different droid that also happens to be an R7 unit?
I like to think that it is. It'd be fun. I think the fact that they all kind of interchange with each other, and especially depending on, I might think I'm thinking it might be Ahsoka that we see in the last scene here. So if that is for the direction I go with this, it could be a crossover where she ends up getting the droid by the end of the show.
Yeah, I could see a situation more where she is just like where Order 66 goes down, she's on the run and she like knows she can't take a droid with her because it's just too much like a burden, too much that could slow her down, and so she just drops R7 off with Trace and Rafa before she splits. Because she's like, hey, take care of my droid. I don't know if I'll be able to come. I might come back for it. I might not, but I want you guys to have it.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like at some point they got a line where it's like, oh, that's just how we got it. Some kind of like throwaway line where you're like, oh, that's my droid. Or she says, oh, nice, and like pets him or something. Some moment where you recognize, oh, it is her droid that she gave up.
Yeah.
And that gets us to our final scene here where Trace and Rafa report to some unseen hologram in a cloak and say, oh, we ran into some deprogrammed droids. I thought you might be interested in knowing about them. And that's our nice little setup for whoever that is going and getting the Bad Batch.
Yeah.
What do you think of that? And then what do you think of the setup? And then also lead me in with who you think it is.
I thought the setup was good, and I forgot about like the wording and tone of that scene, so I definitely think we see Trace and Rafa back this season because I think that's when we find out who that was. Mm-hmm. But as far as predictions, I think I got it narrowed down to 2 people. I know you suggested Ahsoka, but if I remember right, because I watched with the subtitles on to help me catch like smaller things, they refer to the person as a he. So unless Ahsoka had a strange phase in her life we don't know about, I think it's a male. And I think it's either A, Bail Organa, or B, Dryden Voss. And because they never said they're working for a rebellion, they just said they're working against the Empire. So I could see it being, they're working for the criminal organization Crimson Dawn, who is trying to like fight against the Empire to carve out their own little space in the galaxy.
Yeah, those are both the safest bets probably, because I think they both have vested interest in finding these clones, especially Dryden Voss. I imagine that's something that'd be valuable for him as a crime lord.
Yeah.
And I would love to see him show up. Like we mentioned before, they had that model made for him for like a shot in the Clone Wars. I doubt they're just gonna do that and be done with it. And if you're keeping up with the comics, Kira and Crimson Dawn made a return a couple weeks ago in the Star Wars comics. So it might, we've seen in the show they can just throw out the comics if they really want to, but also that they're willing to tribute scenes from it. Like they did that Kanan scene more or less in the spirit of the comic book, even if there was moments changed.
Yeah.
So we could end up seeing, like, if Kira's still around way in the point of Empire Strikes Back era Star Wars, like we know that she's at least active in the Crimson Dawn at this point in the story, or not at this point, but throughout the storyline of Star Wars. So we could end up seeing them built up again.
Yeah, and one of the things too is right now I would say I'm like 50% Dryden Voss, 40% Bail Organa, 10% somebody else. The only reason I give Dryden Voss the edge over Bail Organa is we've kind of already had like that similar reveal of someone working for Bail Organa in Rebels of with like Ahsoka and all that. So I just feel like
Hmm.
that would seem too repetitive if like this also happened to be Bail Organa.
Yeah, I like Dryden Voss too because it's a character we haven't seen in animation. In like, I mean, I guess we have technically, but
Yeah,
we haven't seen him do anything
he
in the
had
storyline and be an active character.
he had no lines and like he was just standing in a pose, so like it barely counts.
Yeah, but I like that more about, like I mentioned before, it's fun to bring characters in and be like, oh, here's some more about this one character. So, and maybe they could save Solo and make Solo a good movie. It's just so terrible right
It's
now, right,
great.
Joe?
You're only saying it's terrible because you know I like it. You know you at least enjoy the movie. You're not out here being like it's shitty.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy the movie, but I like to give you some shit once in a while, Joe. You know?
It's a great film. Okay, I wouldn't even go as far as say it's great because that's like how many movies are great, but it's really good. I enjoyed it, but yeah, I think Dryden Voss is a safe bet. One of the other, as far as other predictions, I'm cooling on my theory of Omega being like purposefully giving all of the abilities that the Bad Batch got accidentally, just because of her not being as proficient with the bow. I think if she
Yeah, because
comes
she
out with
doesn't
the
have that
bow,
immediate.
if she comes out with a bow and like she sucks, like she gets like the 3 for 12 or whatever she got with Sid, and then they're like, oh, you got to do this, and she's like, okay, and then she goes 12 for 12. Then I'm like, okay, maybe she is, has, whatever accidental DNA that gave Crosshair the ability to be a sharpshooter. But the fact that she still was kind of shitty with it, I'm going on the theory that she is like all of the Bad Batch combined.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just further and further down the rabbit hole of her being a clone of something. I don't know what they're gonna do with it, but it would
No,
be
I don't think that
ridiculous enough.
I don't think they're gonna be like extremely like, oh, she's like one part what's this Django Fett, one part uh Palpatine, one part Anakin Skywalker. I think they're just gonna straight up be like, yeah, she's a female version of Django Fett and she has Force abilities. That's kind of my what I think they're gonna go as far as full explanation.
Yeah, I don't expect them to go too much into detail. I think they'll leave it up to the viewer to determine, like, oh, that's probably part of this or that experiment that Palpatine was doing, and maybe
Yeah.
he was doing this with that, and then maybe there's some other show or book can pick up on that
Yeah.
little plot line and run with it in a different direction. But yeah, I don't think this show is the place for them to do like a ton of canon problem solving, at least not right now.
Yeah.
Like when you look back at Clone Wars, they didn't really get into that like whole fixing of like Maul and that kind of stuff until like season 3, 4. Once they were established. So I think if we end up seeing things like that, it will be a lot later in the show than it is right now.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's any other theories or predictions I had. They didn't really. It's hard because the show doesn't really give you a lot of, like next time on the Bad Batch, where
Hmm.
you're like, okay, let's form some theories about what we think. Like, we know nothing about what next week's plot is.
Yeah, I hope we get Crosshair back again. It's been a drought of Crosshair, and I think he's an interesting character. He's a cool looking character. I want to see more of what the Empire is like right now. I think that's the more interesting thing about this is like I want to get them either out in the world, seeing other planets and what it's like under the Empire, or see what the Empire is like. I just want to get an idea of what is it like when the Empire is actually taking over this galaxy so quickly and so efficiently.
Yeah, I definitely. I feel like next week we got to do something that gets us back to the main plot, whether it's seeing Crosshair again, or maybe see Cam and Owens try to draw Omega out again, or something that kind of goes back. Because this one, it's like somewhat with the main plot of Wrecker's head situation and all that, but I just want more that kind of brings us back to what the main plot is. I don't want them going on like another mission for Sid.
Yeah, I have one final prediction that they tease Wrecker a lot with the Order 66 turn, and it would be a nice twist if Wrecker is not the one that turns and Echo or Hunter is the one that actually ends up turning, and they've led us along this path of
Yeah,
Wrecker only to subvert us towards the end of someone else
yeah,
being the one that turns.
yeah. I could also see it being a situation of like they have like I know Tech was working on the brain scanner to like detect the microchips because they do know about it or something like that. So I could see it being like a one-time only thing. Wrecker goes off, they fix him, and then immediately after they happen, something happens to Hunter and his goes off, and then it's like,
Oh no. Yeah, that would be intense. I'm really looking forward to how the show will turn. Like the journey of all these animated shows has been like, oh, this is a fun adventure story, and then slowly but surely it's getting darker and darker, and taking it a bit more seriously, a bit more seriously. And this show already started at a bit more of a serious spot than the other ones have. So I'm excited to see just
yeah.
like the rabbit hole it can go down if they really continue the format that these shows have set up.
Season 5, Hunter's just sitting on the edge of a cliff smoking cigarettes.
Yeah, they're slaughtering
They've
civilians.
they've given up on going on missions, and Omega, who now like ages doubly than the normal person, is now what, she's like 10 here, so 5 years later she's like 20, and she's just selling her body for Republic credits and or
Yeah,
Empire
and
credits.
Hunter are lovers now in the future. By
Yeah,
season 5, they've gone really dark with it, really
even though
serious.
they're like more bloodly related than brother and sister, they're like 75%. They're like basically like inbred brother and sister at that point.
And then their child is Ray's mom.
Exactly, that's what happens.
Wow, you guys heard it here first.
What if they did that? Like, what if they were like, yeah, Omega is Ray's grandma?
They're like, oh yeah, it makes sense. I don't even think the timeline lines up at all. Like,
Well, if I'm trying to think, Ray is 19 in The Force Awakens, and The Force Awakens, I think, is 29 years after Return of the Jedi, so Ray's born 10 years after Return of the Jedi. Um, and so this is, I'm trying to think, so 4 years. So 4 years after New Hope, which would be 14 plus 19. What's 14 plus 19?
who knows?
24.
Ray was born in 15, after the Battle of Yavin, the
15?
Rise of the New Republic. Yeah.
15. So 15 plus 19 is 25, 34. So Ray is born 34 years after the events of the Bad Batch.
You know what? That could actually line up.
But the problem is Omega ages doubly fast than everybody, so she would be like 70 years old, fucking giving birth to Ray. So like Ray's grandma makes more sense than
You're right. I
Ray's
forgot
mom.
about the aging up. So yeah, it would have to be her grandma. That would be the twist. My God, they could do it.
Yeah. I hope not. The explanation we got is complicated enough. Because they did the whole
maybe
like
one day.
I think they were like intending Rey to just biologically be Palpatine's granddaughter, and then they like had the thought of, does anyone want to picture Palpatine like having sex? So they were just like, you know what? It's like a strand cast weird clone of Palpatine that is Rey's father. So then it's like all weird and convoluted.
Yeah, if that movie was anything, it was weird and convoluted. They were
Yeah.
out of their way to make things more complicated than they had to be.
Yeah. All they had
Thankfully, we have these animated shows to untangle that web once in a while.
all they had to do was make the Knights of Ren the main villain that Kylo Ren has to fight against when he turns good, and a lot of the rest of this movie would have made more sense. But I still enjoyed it for what it was, so whatever.
This is not the Rise of Skywalker review. This is our Bad Batch review. So, got any
It's all
final
Star
thoughts?
Wars, man.
It's all Star Wars. You know, it's the same.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
the same opera. It rhymes. It's poetry.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on this episode? No, not really. Do you?
Not for me. No, it was a good time, but we talked about it a lot.
All right. So do you want to move on to our next conversation?
Yeah, I have a couple written down for this one, so I'm curious
Yeah.
to get yours.
So I don't normally I mention it at the top of the show, but I think I forgot. So after after all of our reviews for the Bad Batch, we like to have a topic that kind of relates to the episode, but also relates to Star Wars as a whole. And because Omega got her new bow in the last episode, and we got to see her use it in this episode, we wanted to talk about our favorite weapons in Star Wars. So Tristan, you said you had a couple written down. What are some of your favorites?
I'm gonna start off throwing one that I think doesn't get as much love as it probably should, and I really like Ezra's blaster or Ezra's lightsaber in Rebels. I think
Yeah.
it's a unique combination of also being a blaster and a lightsaber. It could have been very gimmicky, but I think he ends up using it in interesting ways throughout the show. And for something that was just designed to sell extra toys, I think it came out pretty well, and it was a cool idea. And that was my pitch for one of the good weapons. What do you think of Ezra's blaster?
Yeah, I thought it was cool. It's a mix between the blaster and a lightsaber. It was really fun kind of weapon that I thought was like a cool mix and something different to do with a lightsaber. So
You got one. You got one down, Joe. Or should I go for another one here?
one of my things, speaking of blasters and bows, you can't talk about cool weapons that really don't make any sense, like Chewie's bowcaster. Like, why does it have to be designed like a crossbow and it shoots blaster bolts? Doesn't really, you know, make a whole lot of sense. But it's
No.
cool looking and it's fun and it launches stormtroopers. So
That's a good one. What does Han say when he fires that thing? Oh, I like this thing, or
yeah,
something like that.
yeah. After
One of
he's
his
been
Marvel quips.
That's one of my. I think that line is not great because you've been sitting next to him for 40 years as he's been using it. So why now all of a sudden are you like, oh, this? I want to fire that thing. Like, I don't know. It's dumb.
Yeah, but I would move on to something from that same movie that I liked a lot, and that's Kylo Ren's lightsaber. My
Yeah.
favorite of the lightsabers. I think the crossguard thing is cool looking without being too much of a ridiculous like. It doesn't have to be like, oh, here's four sides of a lightsaber. Here's one that comes out and spins around like Rey's one from Rise of Skywalker. It's like, oh, it's just a simple extra little thing that he has, and I think it also represents his character because it's so uncontained and so volatile, and it's like this raw energy and anger just completely barely held in check. And I really like Kylo Ren a lot, so I like his lightsaber a lot. So that's my pick for my favorite lightsaber in Star Wars.
All right. We actually have Bobby, who's part of the main show, in the Twitch chat right now, and he was asking if that meant about our earlier conversation if that meant Ray was born in 1993. I think I've done the math before. I think technically, if you say the Battle of Yavin was in 1977, Ray would have been born in 1992. And if you want to line up those dates, and then also he says his favorite weapon in Star Wars, Twitter.
Twitter, the most powerful weapon in all of Star Wars, and YouTube.
Yeah, I think as far as me, as far as lightsabers, I think my favorite Star Wars lightsaber will be the lightsaber of this guy right here. That's Darth Maul with the double-bladed lightsaber.
The double-bladed saber.
Him igniting that thing in the Phantom Menace. I think it would have been far more iconic if he didn't light it in the trailer, and him lighting both sides of it the first time you saw it was in the movie. I think the iconicness would have been greater, but people expected it when they saw it in the movie, so it didn't have the same level of hype. And then I think another great Star Wars weapon you got to talk about is the Death Star. I mean, the shit can blow up planets, so.
Yeah, it's no Star Killer base, but it can blow up one planet once in a while.
All right, well, Star Killer Base was. That's my other big problem with The Force Awakens is Star Killer Base, but that's a different conversation for a different time.
And the fact that they've tried to repeat it so many times, I think, just speaks to the fact that it's so iconic. Like they can't think of anything else to do except for how do we beat the thing that was so good in the very first movie?
Yeah, they got the Death Star in Episode 4. They got the second Death Star in Episode 6. They got the big gray circle in the sky that is just a space station, but it looks like a Death Star with a ring around it in the Phantom Menace. And then you have Star Killer Base in Episode 7. So
hopefully we're done with those, at least for a little while.
yeah, I don't need any more Death Stars. Come up with a new thing that's cool and awesome.
I want to give a shout out to the seismic charges. How do we talk about Star Wars weapons and not mention the seismic charges, the ultimate sound design of Star Wars? Thank you, ILM.
Yeah, the seismic charges are amazing. They were amazing in Attack of the Clones. They're the best moment in Attack of the Clones. And then when Boba Fett comes back in The Mandalorian and drops them, that was great.
Yeah, I think it's good. I really love that sound. Like, I'll just watch Attack of the Clones so I can wait for that one scene because it's like I got to put the headphones on. I got to get ready. Here come the seismic charges. They didn't quite live up to me sound-wise in The Mandalorian. It wasn't as epic as it felt like in Attack of the Clones, but it was still cool to see them back again.
You're just a Mandalorian hater, so.
Look, I mean, we're talking about I think Bad Batch is better than Mandalorian, but we'll get to that in a future episode probably.
That's inaccurate, See, I like when characters races are represented by the actors that played them and not a bunch of Maori, actors voiced by a white guy. So you just
Oh, okay.
you just have racist thoughts. Robert Rodriguez directs an episode, a Latino director, and you're like, oh, I don't enjoy this. So I see where you're going.
Yeah, like I like my shows. Somehow this animated kid show has more of a plot than two entire seasons of Mandalorian did, and I don't know how to
Mm,
feel about that.
I don't know if that's accurate either. But anyway, so favorite weapons, you gotta go. Another one I think people forget about is what's his face, Donnie Yen's character in Rogue One with his, like little bow thing that he has to pump up, and he was taking out Tie fighters with that. That was pretty sick.
Yeah.
It's one of those ones that like the strength of it kind of just went with whatever it was going against. Where if it was like going against a human, it would just kind of like hit them and they'd fall over, but also it could blow up a TIE fighter. So a little bit inconsistency in the power of the weapon, but either way, it allowed a guy on the ground to take out a TIE fighter. So it at least deserves to be mentioned.
Yeah, I think Rogue One had some great action sequences. I think especially there was some I can't remember that. Oh, the Borgullet. That could be a
Oh,
good weapon. You know, that was a Saw
that scene
Gerrera's
is
weapon.
dumb. Okay, that scene could have been great if anything that happened with the Borg gullet mattered at all, but none of it mattered on any
Yep.
level. They were just like, "Oh, the pilot's out of commission. We need him, back on his feet." And then he's like, "What? Oh, well, I'm fine now. So yeah, I can pilot your thing."
I'll throw one love to Mandalorian and say that it was cool when Boba Fett, or I think it was Tamara Morrison. I mean, I think it was Boba Fett's character. It might have been one of them used the rocket launcher thing on the top of the armor for Boba Fett and had the little thing come down, and I thought that was really cool. I like the way that they took Boba Fett's armor and like turned it into expanded upon what it was and used it pretty cool way. I just thought it was cool that
Yeah. I
had the
think
viewfinder come down and the rocket and everything else.
I think that might have been in the Cobb Vanth episode, but I don't remember. I don't know what you're talking about. Also, the knee rockets from that Boba Fett uses in his episode of The Mandalorian.
Yep, yep. Those are also really good. God, Star Wars is filled with some great weapons. Even the stuff that shows up for like one scene in Rebels, or in Clone Wars or something like that. There's
Yeah.
always someone to pull up some like cool looking cannon or like the dark saber will show up or something like that.
Oh, how did I not mention Dark Saber is my favorite lightsaber. Duh. I always forget about the Dark Saber.
Any other final weapons? I feel like you've covered a lot of the
No,
highlights here.
because the Dark Saber is the best weapon in all of Star Wars, so that's the only weapon we need to reference.
You mentioned dark saber, you mentioned Kylo Ren's lightsaber, so I feel like we've covered everything.
Yeah. I want to see a cool new lightsaber in the next, live action Star Wars or whatever. The next time we see a live action Star Wars lightsaber duel, I want to see a cool new lightsaber. That's what my wish is.
That'd be nice, but it's probably gonna be Obi-Wan or Ahsoka, so we probably won't see one.
They could fight a villain with a cool lightsaber. So.
We'll see.
When Obi-Wan fights Mace Windu in the Obi-Wan show, then we'll get a purple lightsaber fight. So
We'll have like a triple bladed purple lightsaber.
exactly. All right. Any final thoughts on this discussion?
No, I had a good time. It was a lot of weapons I'm sure we missed, but Star Wars is filled with iconic and cool weapons.
Yep. All right. Have a nice day. Thanks for watching. Catch us next week when we review episode 7 of The Bad Batch, titled to be determined later.